Hi everyone, I'm Dina Altieri here with Culinary Skills Chef in the Garden segment on knife skills. Super excited to show you the basics of knife safety, your essentials of knife skills from chopping and mincing to the bâtonnet and the dice. After you're done watching, you'll be able to equip yourselves and your students with some of these important skills. One of the most important skills to remember is safety. Before you bring your vegetables and fruits to the cutting board, go ahead and give them a good wash. So one of the things that I always do when I set up my station is make sure that I've got the right tool for the jobs that lay ahead, right? If I need a paring knife, for example, to peel an onion, that's at the ready. All the knives have been washed, all the knives have been sanitized, proper knife or tool for the task. Anytime I'm peeling something, I keep some paper towel here so that when I'm done peeling, I can simply just pick up the paper towel with peel and discard them, or if I'm composting, put them into a compost pail. The other thing to remember is, you know, depending on what knife hand you use, right or left, you want to be thinking about moving, in my case, from left to right, because I use my right hand to do all of the cuts. So you'll notice things are staged to my left and then things are being sort of finished or, you know, put into containers in my right. So that's really an intentional kind of movement. I think the other thing that could be interesting is your students might benefit from just a very basic like knife skills tutorial in a kind of 3D sort of fashion where they can see the visuals of all the different knife cuts that we're going to talk about, and then also just the different dimensions, if you will. It's an inch, it's a half inch, it's a quarter inch. A lot of times that's really abstract when you don't have the ruler per se right in front of you. So not that you have to be so intentional that you're measuring each cut, but just for the frame of reference. So we're going to start with potatoes. Step one is going to be to peel the potato. This is a russet potato. It's really good to start with something that's easy to cut. I'm going to go ahead and just peel. And when you're doing that, and just on the paper towel is a nice convenient way. Just makes cleaning the cutting board just a little bit easier. Just make sure you're taking away all of the peel. You also want to have a little bit of sanitizer handy as well to sanitize your knives. So here's our potato. The first thing that's really important is the type of grip you're using. It's pretty common to have the finger over the spine of the knife, but when we're teaching knife skills, we usually instruct folks to kind of grip the knife with more of a pinch grip so that your hands are kind of wrapped really close to that bolster, which gives you that really nice elliptical motion. So if you're doing this, you actually can't really get that good pivot on your wrist. So pinch grip. And then since I use my right hand, the critical thing too is like, what is my left hand doing? My left hand is in, you'll hear some chefs kind of call it a claw, which is basically where you're taking your fingertips and you're kind of rolling them back so that you're leading with the knuckles there as sort of a guide that your knife is staying not only straight, but that your knife is also not running the risk of nicking that tip of your finger. So there's kind of two things going on there. Number one is the pinch grip and the grip on the right hand is equally as important as what's happening with your guard fingers. And then the hand is also kind of holding what it is you're cutting. So you don't want to just be there with one finger. You actually have to hold on to what it is that you're cutting. So stay safe, keep those tips back, and then your little thumb can kind of inch up as well. So you do want to make sure that the thumb is tucked in addition. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some just smooth cuts along the potato. All I'm really doing is I'm just trying to create some square, flat sort of sides. But the important part is moving from left to right, making sure you're intentional about the pieces that you're shaving off and being sure that you're using them, because this would not be garbage, right? This would be a great mashed potato in the future. So now you have a squared off potato. When you're doing traditional knife cuts, a lot of times what chefs will do is they'll cut something in half, because a traditional knife cut is going to keep you somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 inches. The concept here is we start with a squared side, which also makes it nice that it's not wobbling on the cutting board. And then the pieces that we're removing, whichever side you choose from, are going to be these really, really nice kind of squared off pieces. So when you're doing a bâtonnet, if you have your ruler handy, is you're really looking for kind of in that 1/4 of an inch realm. So now you've got what I like to call planks. And those planks are all 1/4 of an inch. Why? Because we're producing what's called a bâtonnet. So when you're cutting, you've got that left hand doing what it needs to do, fingertips kind of curled back, but you've also got some opportunity here to kind of move through the cut. One of the things that's good to think about is the sound you're making, or the lack of sound that you're making. So if you're going like this, you're really not necessarily executing the cut properly, because what you're looking for, after all, is more of from that tip to that heel of the knife that you're going in more of an elliptical motion. So usually in a knife skills lab, if you hear a lot of chop, chop, chopping on the board, you might want to stop everybody and kind of review the concept of more of a elliptical motion rather than a chopping motion. You'll notice also that the knife I've chosen has a curvature to it. It's not a Santoku knife that actually wants you to go ahead and do your chopping. This knife is intentionally created into the curve so that you can really get that smooth flow. So here's your bâtonnets, right, which are these sticks like this. And from the sticks, it's really nice because you can line them up and you can make your dice. And if all of those things happened the way that you wanted them to happen, your knife cuts should be uniform. And then I think that also begs the question of why uniform knife cuts, right? So on one hand, you can look at that little bâtonnet and it makes you happy because he or she, right, is all squared off and lovely. But really the point is, if they're all the same size, they'll cook uniformly, right? And if they're all the same size when you garnish something with this dice or you put this dice in a soup, they're all gonna look aesthetically pleasing because they are the same size. But most importantly, they will cook evenly. So that's why you're wanting to produce a knife cut that is uniform. So that's the small dice. So knife sharpening is really important. You can use a couple of different things to sharpen your knives. One of the things that I have today is really more for honing the knife and keeping the knife in alignment. So if you have a sharpening stone or you bring your knives somewhere to get them sharpened, that's great. That might be something that you do monthly or a couple times a year, but every day you're on your station, you really want to use a tool like this, which is a sharpening steel, to keep your knives more honed, or really technically that's an alignment of the knife so that it maintains that edge. Let's imagine this is a sharp knife already. I'm still going to use either the ceramic kind of rounded steel or this flat steel to maintain that edge on my knife. So one thing I would recommend is get a towel and go ahead and put your steel face down on the towel, and with a very, you don't have to go fast, with a very slow stroke, you want to basically graze one side of the knife against the steel and then alternate. So in my view, I've got one side of the knife coming down and then I've alternated. So it's going back and forth like that, nice and easy. The thing to consider is when a knife like this is sharpened, it's sharpened usually at around a 20% kind of bevel or angle. So that's the same angle you want to use. Now, bigger steel, same idea, holding it upright. Again, the towel's here so it doesn't slide, but you want to keep that nice 20-degree angle. One easy way to think about that is that it'd be probably about the width of your finger. So if you're here, you can kind of gauge, okay, that's about where I need to be, versus being too sort of close to it or at a 90-degree angle, right? So you're kind of coming back to about 20 and you're going back and forth and back and forth. When you get a little better at it, you can bring it up. Let's practice this with a paring knife, a little less blade. And at that point, what's going on is this is a 90-degree angle. So this is about a 45-degree angle. So that's the angle that you want to hold the steel, not to be confused with that 20-degree angle that you are using to actually create that honing. So that's the honing steel, and you want to keep that at your station pretty much at all times. And again, you want to hone your knife, I would say, repeatedly during the prepping process. So next we're going to talk about peeling a carrot and cutting a carrot into a julienne, and eventually taking that julienne to a brunoise. Again, carrot was pre-washed and we're ready to go. We're going to go ahead and we're going to peel. So the first step is attempt to square it off a little bit. When we do something like a julienne, we usually want to start with about a 2-inch piece. We're going to be using that pinch grip again, tip first down, and trying to get that nice elliptical motion. My thumb is tucked, and my fingertips are also where they need to be. Here again, we're starting with some really nice flat piece. You kind of cut everything in a repeated fashion. So if squaring is the first step, square off all your pieces. Your julienne is 1/8 of an inch, so that's pretty small, maybe even a little smaller than you would think. So when you're cutting, one of the things that I really try to do is look down the spine of my knife to make sure that the planks that I'm pulling off are uniform. That isn't as easy if if your body is bent backwards. You're almost like hovering over the spine of the knife. One thing that's really convenient is usually the spine of the knife is 1/8 of an inch. You can use the spine of the knife to kind of be your measuring tool. So here, after we have our planks, we go ahead and we go in and we cut our sticks. If those planks are uniform, the sticks also will be uniform. Maybe when you get good at it, you grab a couple at a time. If you could stack 2 or even 3, for every cut you get, for every stick you make, you're making 3 sticks. You're going to really end up with that nice little stack of juliennes like that. And look at those, they look nice. Every stick you make, you can make a dice. These little ones, when we push them all up to kind of the heel or the face of the knife and we make a little dice on these are beautiful. These are the brunoise, and they are little, especially with carrots. They're almost like little confetti looking dice, but they're beautiful. One of the things that would be good to maybe talk to your kids about is what are all these things used for, right? A julienne of carrot might be nice in a salad or a slaw, and then a brunoise might be really pretty as a little garnish like that. So we are lucky in Arizona. We have a lot of great citrus that grows here. So I'm going to show you how to properly produce what's called a citrus supreme. So we're going to use blood orange for this particular exercise. And one of the things that might be nice to do is to switch out to a serrated knife, which is also called a saw-toothed knife, because you can see the blade there. Be very careful though. A serrated knife is incredibly sharp and stays sharp for a long time. One thing that I'd like to do is put gloves on for this, because this is a ready-to-eat product. So what I did was I took one side each of the blood orange off so that I have a nice secure platform. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the serrated knife exactly how it is supposed to be used, which is sawing it. So it's not chopping with it, it's back and forth and back and forth. But you want to try to remove all of that pith, which is the white part. So you have kind of it rounded off like that. And if you missed a little bit, take your paring knife gently and just kind of go back through it. What you are left with is nice and round, that when you made your cuts, you sort of followed the curvature, and now you're going to go back through it and you're going to do what's called the supreme. So new knife skill, paring knife now, and you're going to hold this in your hand, and all you're really going to do is just gently go between each of the membranes to remove these beautiful little segments. See that right there? You're being really intentional here to make sure that you're only cutting in between each of those membranes, kind of notch out that really, really nice segment. Pinch grip on that little paring knife, right? But getting up there and being really safe. I'm not really pushing. Because I have a nice sharp knife, it's really a very gentle slicing that I'm doing. And what I'm left with is this really clean membrane removed supreme. I'll juice it a little bit so I can store or hold my citrus segments in their own juices, and they're really at this point kind of ready for service just like that. So what you're left with is a nice segment at the end of it. All right, right, so we're gonna cut some herbs next. We have some really nice Italian parsley, and we're just gonna do a chop. So we're gonna start by taking the Italian parsley that we've washed, kind of sprig by sprig, just removing each of the leaves like that. So you have all of the parsley taken off of the stem, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of gather the herbs in a pile, and we're gonna roughly chop them just to sort of break down the pile. There are recipes that definitely will call for a nice rough chop of your herb, but we're gonna go through it now and switch up our grip, and still doing kind of a pinch, but we're pinching in two different areas to kind of create a little bit of a semicircle as we go through this pile. But you do need a grip. You don't want to be going like this. You really do need two hands to kind of create that rhythm. And if the parsley starts to spread on the board, you can use a bench knife like this and kind of gather it. I'd rather you're scraping your bench knife than your knife against the cutting boards. What is your recipe calling for? Is your recipe calling for coarsely chopped, or is your recipe calling for finely chopped? Again, being really careful here, right? I'm just touching the face of the knife as I pull the herb off of it. But if you want to do a nice fine chop, usually when you know it's time to stop, when you can't really see where one piece starts and the other piece ends. It just starts to look like it's one very finely minced scenario. So that's nice, just like that, a nice fine chop. And you can see how nice it'll sprinkle and garnish something, or finish a salad with it, or finish a soup with it, just like that. So that's ready to go from there. All right, so we're gonna do basil chiffonade. First we remove the leaves from the really nice Genovese basil, and it's kind of fun, but you stack them in the best little pile that you can manage and give them a little roll. And then choose a knife that you're really comfortable with, the sharpest knife you have, because you don't want to bruise the leaves here. But what you're going to do is you're going to just really tuck up on that cigar roll of basil and really hone in on a nice, steady elliptical motion so you get a really smooth, feathery chiffonade when you're done. And if you've done it right, it won't be bruised, it won't oxidize, it'll stay nicely green and bright, and from there you can do so many things with a basil chiffonade. All right, so we're gonna small dice an onion, and one of the things you wanna be thinking about when you're gonna do a dice is you need to remove a little bit from the core, that sort of root end here, but not too much, because that is what's gonna be holding all the pieces of the onion together. So when you make your cut here, be really mindful that you don't take too much of that root out. So then after you get the kind of north side and the south side cut off, you go ahead and you have it, and then you want to peel it. You can use your fingers for this. Get that onion nice and clean and ready for the dice. Now when you're doing a dice, you really need to learn how to move your knife into sort of a horizontal pattern. And what you're going to do is, with the sort of the heel of your hand and the horizontal maneuver of your knife, you're going to move towards the core with some horizontal slices. If your knife is sharp, you're going to be able to cruise through that pretty easily. And the distance that you're slicing in is going to be incredibly dependent upon what it is you're going for. So in this case, I'm going for like a medium dice, kind of in more of like a 1/2 inch. If you wanted to take the second half and do it smaller, then when you do your horizontal cuts, they're just closer together. You have the power to decide how big or how little that dice is going to be, dependent upon how close those horizontal cuts are. So in this particular case, that first half was a medium dice. So every time I cut now on the vertical, I'm going to just keep that same dimension that I did going in the horizontal direction. And then go ahead and turn that onion now and go back to that same thing we've been doing. Claw, thumb tucked, and a good pinch grip and a nice elliptical kind of motion on that. It's common for the onion, once you get towards the back end here, to kind of be moving and wiggling around. So just think about safety first. If there's a piece that's wanting to separate from the others, we'll just let it separate and stay safe. Then go ahead and grab what piece is remaining and go ahead and do your cuts. And then also when you're here, now you can kind of go back through if you have a little bit left and go back through and do the dice from there. So what you should end up with is something that resembles that sort of squared off medium dice. And it is not uncommon to take your knife once through it if you thought that, boy, there's just a few pieces there a little out of sorts, and kind of finish it off like that. When you grab a bulb of garlic, there are many, many cloves in there. Usually just kind of back of your hand, you can divide and sort of separate out each individual clove. And when you have, a clove like this, there's a couple different ways you can peel it. Just a gentle bit of pressure, nothing too forceful, otherwise it will completely mash. You can end up with your clove like this. So from here, just like with an onion, there's a little kind of core and a little sort of piece there that you might want to remove, but not too much of it because it's gonna, it's wasteful. Just a little bit there on either end. And then what you might want to do is, if you feel like you can negotiate this, maybe with a paring knife, you could do a few horizontals and you can do a few verticals like that. And then from there, just go ahead through it. And like we did when we did chopping with our herbs, you can just go back through your pile, and garlic gets really sticky. So just be careful as you're pulling it off your knife, and go back through and kind of do that little bit of that chopping until you get it down to a mince. And for me, the definition of a mince is I can't tell where one piece starts and one piece ends. I know I'm minced. So for ginger, it's a nice technique to use, just a spoon to go ahead and peel ginger, and it'll really end up removing very little of the ginger when you do it this way, rather than using basically a peeler. So just by using a little bit of force, you can get a good peel on your ginger. Just hold it in your hand and kind of grip it while you're moving through like this. And a lot of times there's little pieces, so you can remove some of the pieces to get into the actual peel of it, but it smells so good too when you're peeling it this way. You're removing some of that peel, and then you get a little bit of the juice kind of doing its thing. It's sometimes can be a little bit daunting looking at a head of cauliflower or a head of broccoli and trying to figure out how to remove the florets. So one of the things I do is I use a paring knife and kind of work my way around the core. First, you might want to get in there and remove some of the leaves, but really by going kind of in a circle, always being behind the knife, right? My fingers are not here, they're behind the knife. You'll start to be able to peel away some of the leaves, and you'll be able to start to remove the large, beautiful florets. This is nice too because you can utilize the stem. Very, very tasty. So just maybe peel it a little bit. Now you've got your florets, and from here you can really do a bunch of things. You can just kind of cut them down into pieces that are the size that you're looking for. Maybe you're roasting. Maybe you want to break them up. And then with this, you can switch out to your larger knife and kind of go back to our discussion about planking and dicing, and kind of go from there with your pieces and do whatever you want to do with that. But now you have a nice, array of product that's all usable. Let's de-seed this Fresno chili. Let's do gloves. And remember what we talked about. Make sure the gloves fit. It can be unsafe if you have extra glove kind of hanging off of your fingers. So choose the right size for your hand. Couple different ways to approach this. I would use a small knife so that the tool matches the task. It would seem a little unusual to go after that Fresno with a large chef's knife, so we'll choose this ceramic paring knife. To me, the easiest way is to just go ahead and take the stem off and, go through the process of maybe taking off the edges, right? So that you end up with just a small little bit in your hands that you're holding rather than going around. If it's a bell pepper, sometimes you can get around it, but with something little like this, you're almost really better off getting it in kind of the planks or the quadrant like that. And then from there, what I would suggest is get rid of those seeds kind of right away. Just get them out of the way. And then from here, a couple different things you can do. I like to switch out the knife now and maybe do a nice julienne. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is it is much easier to cut the internal part of the pepper with your knife rather than flipping it over and cutting on the outside. That's almost a little bit waxy and it's a little bit tough. So if you try that, sometimes you're really having to like force to get your knife through it rather than going in it from the other angle. And you might get your little julienne of pepper like that. A couple different things you might do. Go back to that julienne and then the brunoise. That'd be a common way to see a pepper in a recipe, like a salsa. Your recipe might call for a mince or a small or finely chopped or a small dice of something like that. So that would be the way you would go about it, is planks and sticks and dice, just like we've done everything else. So I hope you've enjoyed this segment of your culinary skills training. Good luck out there, stay safe, and keep your knives sharp.